Well, I am Meryl Herr, and my family and I have been attending Tabernacle for about 9 months or so. And I'm really honored to be here today with Pastor Kizombo to talk with him from his background in psychology about the book of Lamentations. And we're going to get a unique perspective on the book of Lamentations from Pastor Kizombo today. So, before we begin, I just want to remind us of the context of this book of Lamentations. We've been hearing messages from the book of Lamentations for the past 2 weeks, but it's good to remember the historical context. And to start the historical context, I'm going to take us all the way back to the book of Exodus when God was bringing the people of Israel out of Egypt and forming a new nation. And as they were moving toward the promised land, God wanted to remind them of the type of people that He wanted them to be. And He set up some blessings for them if they would obey Him and follow His decrees. But He also said, if you choose not to obey, meaning you choose not to be my people, then there will be curses. And so, as biblical history progresses, we see God's people struggling to be faithful to Him. God raises up judges from time to time to help them. He raises up kings. He raises up prophets to point them toward faithfulness. And the people refuse to turn to God and instead worship idols and worship the works of their own hands. They fail to care for the poor and the marginalized among them. And so God sends these two nations to really destroy His people and their land, to take them from their land. He brings Assyria to the northern kingdom and later Babylon to the southern kingdom of Judah. And that's where we find Jeremiah. And Babylon's king Nebuchadnezzar has come to Judah. He's set up siege works around the city of Jerusalem. And the people within Jerusalem are suffering immensely. They are experiencing famine. People are being taken away in exile. And then ultimately, the Babylonians are going to break through the wall of Jerusalem, set fire to their beloved temple, set fire to the houses, and ultimately break down the wall. And so, Pastor Kizombo, where we find Jeremiah in the book of Lamentations, is seeing his city utterly destroyed. Talk to us a little bit about the trauma that Jeremiah has endured.
Thank you so much, Meryl, for this time together to be able to talk through the book of Lamentations. It is amazing to see. I should begin by affirming the goodness of God. It is amazing to see how good and faithful God is. The book of Lamentations we are talking about, trauma that we are talking about. Let me put in a context of probably today first before I go into the question you just asked. Here right now where we are in the United States of America, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention tells us that 1 in 5 Americans have experienced some sort of trauma, either through sexual molestations, growing up in homes where they've been beaten by the people that are supposed to take care of them, grew up in homes of alcohol abuse and so forth and neglect, even beaten to a point of being left with a mark on their body. So all of that I want to say that trauma is with us. Trauma has been around us for since the beginning of time. So the historical context you just gave us about the book of Lamentations and the people of Israel, we can begin probably by saying this. Trauma, especially psychological trauma, varies from person to person. It varies from person to person because each person, each one of us is unique and uniquely made by God. And we have different set points of how we experience events that occur around us. Some individuals may respond to trauma with anger, bitterness, sadness, and remain there. Others, depending on where they are on their spiritual walk, on a spiritual journey with God, would be able to affirm what I said at the beginning of my response, that God is good, God is faithful. And by that affirmation, may be able to journey through this trauma journey, even to getting to a point of becoming a helper of others who are experiencing trauma. This could go in a sense of, we have social workers, counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists, many of them who come through this journey of trauma to become healers to others who are experiencing trauma.
Thanks for that definition and for reminding us the goodness of God to bring people through trauma to places where they can share that compassion and hope. What are the types of trauma that we see in the Book of Lamentations?
Wow. In the Book of Lamentations, a whole host of traumatic events that the people of Israel went through. Not unlike what we go through today. We have different names for them today, but the people of Israel, they experience violence. Violence that was brought in. And when you continue to read the Book of Lamentation, you find out that, whoa, it is actually God who was bringing about this violence on his people. Back to the book of Deuteronomy, where he says, if you follow my word, these things will happen. If you do not follow my word, these things will happen. So he being really the one bringing trauma to them, violence to them through the hand of the Assyrian, through the hands of the Babylonian. So we see violence in the Book of Lamentations. We see murder in the Book of Lamentation. We see sexual assault in the Book of Lamentations. We see what we will call today human trafficking, or people going on exile. Well, it's put in exile. You read that, and if you don't make the connection, you may just quickly miss it, that it is actually what is happening probably around us as well as far as human trafficking. We see slavery, people being taken and being subjected to work with an remuneration, with very ill treatment. So we see all those levels of trauma being exhibited and being reported in a Book of Lamentations.
So how might that type of trauma affect a person, not just emotionally, but also physically and spiritually?
Wow. How would this kind of trauma affect a person spiritually, emotionally, and physically? First, I'll begin to say holistically. And that's the three categories you just mentioned there. That because we are not just one-dimensional individuals, we are a whole person, body, mind, spirit. So the effects of trauma physically can be shown by, I was reading a book by Dr. Vanderklark, and the title of the book is The Body Keeps Score. The body keeps a score. And how do we experience that? Physically, as we experience trauma, we could also experience physical illnesses. And there is a big word for that. People are in the business of people helping, they call that psychosomatic. That is, our bodies are telling us something is wrong. So we could experience things like, in fact, a lot of the illnesses that some of us carry, high blood pressure, diabetes, they are linked to some traumatic experiences that we may have gone through. Psychologically, depression, anxiety, anger, outburst of anger also is linked sometimes to trauma that an individual went through. Spiritually, we are not able to form trusting relationships, which also affect our relationship with God, because we are not able to form those relationships because of possibly trauma that we might have experienced along the journey.
So, my question then is, you've mentioned anger as one of those emotions that could be symptomatic of having experienced trauma. What sorts of really strong emotions do we see in the Book of Lamentations?
The Book of Lamentations is full of very powerful descriptive terms for how people feel. not only is there anger in there, there was also fear, a great deal of fear that grips the people as the terror comes from Babylon to Jerusalem. There was sadness, and Jeremiah lays this out where he is overlooking the city of Jerusalem, and his eyes are filled with tears. He is sad to see the destruction, grieving over the destruction of the city, and a sense of overwhelm. So we look in the book of Lamentations, and we see Jeremiah crying for the city of Jerusalem. If we were to move all the way to the New Testament, we find Jesus in Matthew chapter 23, 37 specifically, almost like being at the same space where Jeremiah was, overlooking the city, and there he begins to cry for the city. So the grief overwhelms him, and he says, "Oh Jerusalem," as seeing the city that he loves. In this sense, Jesus is looking at the resistance to God. And Jeremiah, in essence, also seeing the same thing, their non-devotion to God, which tie back to Deuteronomy, where God says, if you are not devoted to me, these things will happen. Their non-devotion to God, and where Babylon comes and takes them into captivity. So there was fear, there was sadness, there was grief, there was overwhelm, anxiety.
What's the value then in noticing, naming, and allowing ourselves to feel such intense emotions?
Oh, there is a word also that I want to mention here, but I'll probably explain it. There is expression of the emotion, the emotion that we feel in lamenting is salutative. That is, it brings about health, it brings about healing. Because when we stuff in our emotions, when we stuff in our emotions, it does affect us. It does affect us psychologically, it does affect us spiritually, and also affects us physically. So the value of confession, the value of agreeing with God, because God knows everything. He knows the pain we go through. So if we stuff them, we are harming ourselves, however, by being able to admit that, Lord, I am hurting. This is painful. There was healing that comes with that. You notice in a recovery movement, for example, Meryl, people that go through any type of recovery, but I will call here Alcoholic Anonymous. One of the things that is central at the core of the healing process is admitting that this is difficult. This is beyond my ability to carry. And turning oneself over. In Alcoholic Anonymous, they say the power that's greater than myself. In our context, we know is turning ourselves over to God, who is powerful. So confession, admitting, brings about a sense of health and healing.
And so then what can the book of Lamentations teach us about bringing our intense emotions before God?
There are a lot of lessons in the book of Lamentation, and I'm so glad our people as a community, we are going through the book of Lamentation. Culturally, this is almost impossible for us to do, to visualize how people can do this today. Why? Well, now this is difficult probably for me to say as a pastor, but the reality is we are rarely authentic. And the book of Lamentation calls us to authenticity. It calls us to owning what is happening with us. Because if we own what's happening with us, we become real. God knows who we are. We know who we are. We know what we've gone through. So what could happen if we begin to confess to one another? If we begin to speak to God truthfully about where we are, I believe this what will happen. There will be freedom of expression. There will be feeling of liberation where people begin to feel a sense of being set free. Jesus says, if you know the truth, and believe the truth. The truth will set you free. Meaning this, in the context of our conversation, knowing that we have experienced trauma, knowing that we journey through trauma, and owning that and admitting to that definitely will bring about a sense of freedom and a sense of health.
Well, as we draw our interview to a close, I want to ask you very practically, we're in this season of social distancing. Many of us are removed from family, from friends, from our small groups. We can't give someone in our small group a hug right now. We can't cry on someone's shoulders. But even in the midst of all that, what are maybe one or two things that we can do at home to help us process through our emotions and bring them before God?
Thank you for asking that question, Meryl. One of the things that I would say right now, and I'm so grateful for the people of our community who have availed themselves to this, and you, in fact, for being here with me. You made me smile when I saw you. You made me smile because I miss seeing you. I miss being with you in worship. So one of the things we need to do is to get to connect with others. Despite the physical distance that we have from one another, that let's find the medium and ways to be able to connect. I'm trying to do this. So when I wake up in the morning, I try to spend some time just quiet in the presence of God, and then jot down some of the things that God is saying to me. So journaling may be another way. We have a saying at our place, spending time with Jesus, spending time with God. So those moments where we are talking to God about what is going on. So people Tabernacle, do not forget spending time with God, because that is one way to be able to cope with the trauma that we're experiencing right now. And let me say this too. I've seen a lot of us adjusting to this, because when I saw you, you made me smile. When I see Owen, he makes me smile, because just the fact of staying with one another, that helps us in this journey. Also, speaking audibly, out loud, verbalizing what you are experiencing. And we are social distancing, but also the people that are instructing us about the progress and the evolution and flattening the curve for the COVID-19, they encourage us to take walks. So nature walks. That's one thing we can do practically. Get out the house, walk probably in your neighborhood. Of course, stay clear of congregating with other people. Those are things that will be able to help us. Another thing, this is a very, very practical, all these things are practical, but also talking to friends about how you are feeling, sharing with friends how you are feeling. And if necessary, talking to your spouse about how you are feeling if you are married. And if you are not married, reaching out to your friends. But also, if absolutely necessary, reach out to people helpers. And there are a lot of them right now. I know this because many of my friends are in the throes of helping people practically journey through this season that we are in.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Pastor Kizombo. So much wisdom that you've brought to us today from the discipline of psychology, but also from the Word of God. So thank you again for your time and your wisdom.
Meryl, thank you. It was a joy to be with you. And I can't wait for us to be physically together again in worship. And I will say this to all the people of Tabernacle, we are praying and we know that our God is a solid rock. When everything else around us is sinking sand, Jesus Christ is our rock. And let's stand firm on him. Thank you for the conversation this afternoon.